Hello colleagues, I'd like to thank Mike for allowing me to take a few minutes of your time today to revisit the topic of acute childhood experiences. While Mr. Lieberman gave us an excellent overview of this topic last week, today I'm going to share an additional resource and some information with you that I think will help us bridge the gap between our understanding about acute childhood experiences and the classroom practices that best support students with trauma. So last week, Mr. Lieberman did a great job of allowing us to expand our understanding of adverse childhood experiences. In addition to the research that he gave us on statistics regarding the prevalence of trauma in students, he helped us identify the types of adverse experiences that many of our students may have undergone. I bet that you could probably have generated a list like this on your own. Trauma and students affected by trauma is not a new topic for us. We deal with those externalized behaviors that Mr. Lieberman discussed last week all the time, so we see the effects of trauma in our students on a daily basis. He also provided us with some great information that allows us to expand our understanding of how acute stress and stress hormones and the body's response to that can cause disrupted development in terms of cognition and brain development, and of course cause impairment all along the line, even perhaps causing early death. And while he gave us some resources around the idea of how to best support students who are dealing with trauma, I found that many of the pieces of information from St. A were therapeutic in nature, and they didn't seem to me to really be applicable to my classroom. So I'd like to share a new resource with you today. You might be familiar with Education Northwest. That's the nonprofit education think tank that's located in Portland. And this is a publication that they've created, a practitioner's guide to educating traumatized children. This is available online as a PDF, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of it via email. The focus of trauma-informed practices, or the guiding principles, are to try to do two things: to prevent re-traumatization or re-injury. So in classroom experiences, we don't want students to experience more trauma or to get re-injured by trauma. Also, we want to try to do our best to break the cycle of trauma and the effects of trauma. So in the book, I found most helpful two sections. One was on student-teacher interactions, or trauma-informed interactions, and the other was on trauma-informed classroom strategies. So in terms of teacher and student interactions, what should we keep in mind, and what should our intentions be to best support students dealing with the effects of trauma? Here's some key points. Always empower, never disempower. Remember, students who have had an acute childhood experience are often in that fearful, frightful state, and so anytime that we get into a power struggle with them, that's just increasing their sense of helplessness, and it's causing a re-injury, a re-traumatization. So we want to try to avoid power struggles. Empower rather than disempower. Express unconditional positive regard to all students, no matter what. Even when those externalized behaviors are cruel or extreme, we want to find a way to have a positive response. Remember Dr. Lieberman's idea last week of co-regulating your emotions? A positive or even response, even when the behavior is negative. We want to maintain high expectations. We do this for all students, but it's really important for students who are dealing with the effects of trauma. They're sort of expecting to fail, and that's been their experience through most of their childhood and their education experience. So we want to have high expectations for them. Send the message that every student is capable and every student is worthy. We want to check our assumptions and be good listeners and observe, especially ask questions. When students act out, it's easy to come to a quick assumption about what it is that's motivating the behavior. But remember, students with trauma, that manifests in a lot of different ways. So we've got to be a good listener, and we want to avoid jumping to conclusions or making assumptions as soon as we're having difficulty with students. We want to be a relationship coach, because students who are dealing with the effects of trauma lack some of those social skills that are important. And so we need to model positive tone, positive demeanor, and positive interactions. We want to provide opportunities for helpful participation. This is another way to help improve those social skills among students that are affected by trauma. If we can get them into some kind of peer tutoring, even if it's right here in your classroom, get them into some peer support or group work, that allows for them to practice those social skills and to improve those social skills. I found that this was an informative list that allowed me to sort of revisit my tone with students and my interaction with students to make sure that I'm intentional about doing my best to support students who are dealing with the effects of trauma. There was another discussion in the booklet around trauma-informed instructional practices that I also felt was helpful. There were 14 different suggestions on things that you could do in your classroom to best support students affected by trauma. I'm just going to highlight a few. Provide predictable structure and routines. So remember, trauma and adverse childhood experiences are often accompanied by chaos. So anything that we can do to provide order rather than chaos is going to support those students who've been affected by trauma. Use explicit cues for preparing and initiating transitions. Oftentimes these students don't clue in to when it's time to put away one task and take out another, or to move from one part of the room to another part of the room. They don't self-regulate well. And so if we can coach them through transitions, we'll get a better experience. We want to teach to a variety of learning styles. So kinesthetic learners are often neglected in some of our subject areas, and students with trauma often need that tactile kinesthetic learning. So if you can use a variety of instructional strategies that cover a lot of learning styles, you'll be supporting students affected by trauma. Allow for choice whenever possible. So if there's any way for students to choose a topic for a report or a project, something that reflects their own interest, that's another way to empower students rather than disempower. And again, you have a more positive result because of that. Allow for more success than failure. Especially when learning something new, students that have experienced trauma expect to fail. That's been their experience up to this point working with you. And so we need to find ways to build lots of opportunities for success, to build that earned self-esteem, to sort of mitigate the effects of trauma. Also, we want to provide external rather than internal cognitive structures. Remember, students who are affected by trauma have had problems with that brain development piece. Their cognitive development has been disrupted. And so connecting the dots, breaking things down into smaller bits, understanding how a long-term task might play out, that's difficult for these students. So if we can provide graphic organizers or vocabulary lists of key terms, outlines that will help them with note-taking, planners that indicate due dates for long-term tasks, if we can scaffold and break down everything, then we're going to be supporting students who have those cognitive lapses. Finally, we want to pair trauma-affected students with socially capable students for cooperative groups. Like I mentioned before, that's one way to boost the social skills of students who are affected by trauma, because they get that peer mentoring and peer modeling when they work with students who have good social skills. Finally, the last thing that I really liked about this book is it had a great section in the end about how to identify and look for signs of trauma. And that section was broken down by developmental level. So what we might see in trauma-affected students at primary grades, elementary grades, middle grades, and how that might play out and what it would look like in a high school age student. So that's in the appendix of the book, signs to look for and symptoms that indicate that a student has been affected by trauma. Thank you again for allowing me to take some of your time today to revisit this important topic. And the last thing that I want to do is connect a couple of dots. Oftentimes when new topics come up for professional development, they seem like they're separate or they're other from the work that we're normally doing. Remember, our mission at Cottage Grove High School is to provide a welcoming environment for all students, one where all students could be successful. And so trauma-informed practices play right into our mission statement. They're part of our equity and understanding the diversity of our students and making sure that all students are supported here at CGHS. So thanks again.